I'm Daryl with Roswell. We're here to install a Can-Am X3 Stage 2 audio package. This XMR is provided by Central Florida Power Sports, and thank you guys for hooking this up. So let's talk about the product that's going in this unit. We've got a 10-inch sub and box underneath the passenger seat, two 6.5-inch speakers going up on the dash facing the passengers, and then two pair of Firefly 6.5-inch cage speakers. Now both of these sets of speakers are backlit with LEDs behind the speakers themselves, but on the Fireflies, the entire housing is actually backlit, so these things really pop and really come alive at night. We've got the LED kit to power all the LEDs. We have the Roswell OFFROAD amplifiers, one to power the 6.5s and the other to power the sub. We have the Roswell OFFROAD head unit. This guy's going to be mounted up on the dash, and it is actually reverse camera compatible, so you can actually hook up a video feed and see what's going on behind you. And included in this package is all the wiring you're going to need for a really easy plug-and-play solution. I'm going to head over to that XMR and show you how it's done. So I'm going to give you a quick system overview, where the product is going to be located, and what panels we're going to have to remove to make this install easy. So up in the center dash here is going to be where the head unit is located. Wiring is going to go underneath the center console. We're going to replace the two panels on the driver and the passenger side for those 6.5-inch speakers. To provide easy wiring access, we're going to remove actually a lot of the passenger side dash. Amps are going to be located on the firewall right near the battery. So to get that access, we're going to actually pop this seat right out. It's also going to provide our mounting location for our sub. We're going to install the Fireflies along this rear cage roll bar. Now our Fireflies could also be installed on these upright bars. Because this unit was optioned with the snorkel kit, ours are going to be along this rear line here. I'm going to show you our Razor really quick just to show how they would be mounted on those uprights. Our speakers are also able to be pulled out and rotated to always correct that emblem and make it look like a professional install. First step is going to be popping this seat out. So looking inside here, you can see the rear anchor bolts. You might have to adjust the seat slide to get those lined up with those access holes. You're going to use an 18mm socket. Next, we're going to remove the front anchors using a 13mm. I'm going to slide the seat ahead a little bit just to provide us access to remove this seat belt anchor. Now we can remove this completely from the vehicle. So with the seat out of the way, and since we're going to be doing some electrical work, let's disconnect the battery just to be on the safe side. Using a 10mm socket, back this out. Let's put that screw back in there so we don't lose it. Next, we're going to move on to the center console, loosen this guy off to be able to get all the other panels out from underneath it. Starting with the 4 push pins up on the dash. And there is one hiding underneath the key sense here on the driver's side. You have to access it from underneath. With the push pins removed, we're going to move on to the Torx bolts. There's 2 located under this cover, and then 2 located down here. May have to move the shift lever out of the way. Before we remove the glove box, we have to take out the screws on this upper trim panel. Remove the T30. So we removed the 3 upper ones. We're going to skip over this one because we'll need to cover the nut on the fuel fill side, but this guy is able to be taken out right now. Pop the glove box lid out of the way. Pop off the fuel fill cover. I'm going to cover the nut on the fuel fill side with a 10mm. Then we can remove this screw. With all the screws removed and the center dash floating, we're able to lift this guy up and then work the passenger dash out of the way. Now that the upper trim is removed, we can take out the glove box and the kick panel below it. That's going to give us a lot of wiring access. There's 2 T30 inside the box, 2 on the lip, and then 2 push pins underneath inside. With all the screws removed, glove box lifts right out. With the center loosened, we can take the passenger side trim pieces off. It's going to give us a mounting location for the RGB controller and allow us to remove the glove box and associated panels. Just gently pull on the side panel and be aware of this little holder tab. They are tension clips everywhere else, so once those 3 have been released, you can actually just lift this right out of the way. Next, we'll move on to this piece. There's 2 holder tabs in these corners, and then 2 tension clips holding the rest of the piece in. So again, be aware of where those are as you're removing these parts. Now this guy kind of slides in that way, so pull it out after your tension clip has been relieved. I'm going to remove this lower panel. It's going to give us a lot of wiring access, not only in the kick panel here, but underneath the center dash as well. There's 2 push pins on the center tunnel and 1 push pin on the outside kick panel. This guy will slide out. It can be removed from the vehicle. Now we're going to remove the dash side. Now before we take out any of the screws while the panel is still nice and firm, let's disconnect the switches. You can reach underneath here, feel the back side of the switch, and there's actually a push tab to release the lock. And there we go. Move the steering wheel out of the way. There's 2 T30 screws behind the gauge cluster. With the rest of the screws surrounding, there's 3 up here and 2 on the side. With all the screws removed, you can lift up the center dash and try to sneak out the driver one here as much as possible. Now there are wires connected on the back side still and the smart lock controller. So there's only going to be so much room you can get before you have to release some of these tension clips. And on this smart lock controller, there's this red tab that you have to push down. That will allow you to disengage the lock. There should be no remaining wires left connected. You can remove this from the vehicle. So with the panel out of the vehicle, we're going to relocate some of the parts onto the new panel to prep that for installation. We're going to remove the switches by depressing the 2 tabs on either end of the switch and wiggling it free. And we're also going to relocate the push pin locks by pinching the tabs on the back side and removing the washer. Winch went on the outside panel. Light nearest the gauge cluster. These guys pop in from the top side. And then just insert the washer around the clips. And don't forget the blank switch in the middle. So with the seat removed, we're going to insert these spacers between the slide rail cards and the seat base. It's just going to lift up the seat base a little bit to provide that clearance for the subwoofer. Loosen off with a 13 mil. It's going to loosen off the other side just so we have some play to insert these without all the carts sliding around everywhere. With disassembly complete, we're going to use our wiring harnesses. Everything is plug and play, so it's a really simple installation process. You can refer to the wiring diagram and the labels on the cable themselves. So first I separated between the driver's side and the passenger side. Everything is cut to length, so it's important to know where these wires are going. I'm going to leave the driver's side and I'm going to focus on the passenger side first. With the amp location on this end and cage speakers being mounted up here, the cage speakers receive the plug end, so this end must be ran up to the front, and as you can see, it's also labeled. So this is the passenger side cage. These labels are located further down the chain a little bit, so once everything is installed, you don't see the labels sticking out. These harnesses are pre-terminated for ease of install, a literal plug and play installation. The amplifier side being the receptacles, will stay down in the vehicle, and then the plug end will go up to the cage speakers. Since these are also cut to length, we're gonna keep the amplifier end down in the vehicle and run these guys up the cage to the speaker locations. So we're gonna start by keeping these here in this vicinity. The plug end is gonna go underneath the gusset and up this location between the frame. It's gonna duck out behind the fender and actually come back in between this panel here, then up to each cage speaker. From inside the vehicle, we stub it through behind this quarter panel. Wire it back up here along the cage frame. Tucks out nicely here, and it can be laid underneath the trim. As I mentioned, these are cut to length. So once we get the speakers mounted up here, you'll see that they are just the right length. So once you have the ends up here at the cage side, you're gonna look and see you have about 1.5 to 2 feet of excess wire. Once we get the cage speakers mounted, we can play with that length and adjust as needed. So next, working on the driver's side, there's enough room under the tunnel to tuck it right underneath there. Then we can zip tie it up along the way. Again, ensuring the plugs are feeding up to the speakers. So we're running it under the tunnel, and then we'll grab it from underneath the seat and feed it into the frame area. So the speaker plug end was passed underneath the tunnel. We're gonna ensure we're underneath the brake line. Once on this side of the vehicle, the wires follow the same path as the passenger side. With a rough wire ran for the cage speakers, we're going to install the Fireflies up there. Then we'll be able to adjust the length of wires on either end and make sure everything is nice and clean and gets to where it needs to go. So when you open up your Fireflies, the clamp is not attached to the speaker yet. You can see that there's 3 notches and 3 matching notches on the clamp. That allows you to twist. There's already a physical lock there. Then these set screws will lock in whatever rotation is required for your install. A little tip is to just barely snug the set screws in place, so you're still able to rotate the speaker as needed once it's mounted to the cage. Once it's finally set to your desired angle, then you can lock everything down and it'll stay in its place. So it's easier to do it with 2 people, but it is manageable with 1 person because these speakers are nice and light. Pop this guy up onto the cage. So I'm gonna do the outside ones here first. Get all the screws started here. I'm gonna move this speaker all the way to the outside. It's gonna be right against this gusset, and then I'm gonna actually rotate it down to provide clearance for anyone wearing a helmet. So as you can see, the clamp is now nice and tight, but I'm still able to swivel and make those fine-tune adjustments. I can plug this speaker in, so then we can figure out the lengths on the wire required on the other end. On this next set of speakers, we're actually gonna go on top of the gusset a little bit just to keep them as far wide as possible. So we've got the cage speakers mounted and wires are roughed in. Now we're gonna move on to the wiring on the dash. Same concept, going to the speaker location. Again, speaker label, receptacle, staying at the amp location. Again, left and right side. Following the initial entry location underneath the gusset, we're gonna take these wires forward, keep it underneath the panel here, and then we'll be able to zip tie up this frame to the 1 speaker location, run underneath the center of the dash to the driver's side location. With this frame cutout here, you're able to sneak in your fingers and grab them and then feed them up to the next location. You can use this frame cutout as a little cheat location, then be able to flex the rest of the kick panel out of the way and run it up near the frame without trying to force the big plugs through the back panel. So I'm following this frame rail up and I'm actually able to tuck it between the gas fill. So as you're pulling the wires up on the dash, again, be mindful of how much you have at the amp location, about foot and a half. So I'm feeding the passenger side through this other gusset support, again, just for that added control of speaker wire so it's not bouncing and moving around. The driver's side wire is gonna follow the passenger up to the front of the vehicle, then make its way across to the driver's side speaker location. So keeping it pretty much right in this vicinity.
Yep, I see it.
We're gonna pass it underneath this little gusset again, just for that added wire control. As you can see, there's a few great locations for zip tie mounts. Secure it along the path. Next is installing the head unit RCA wires. It's gonna go up to the center dash where the head unit is gonna be located and back to the amplifiers for that signal wire. To prepare for the head unit install and where the RCAs are gonna be located, we did drill a 2-inch hole in the dash panel here. Now, I did space this out to be about 1.5 inches from this location to prevent hitting this tube rail underneath the panel. We're gonna install the RCAs following the same wire path as the dash speakers up to this location. Then we're gonna come over and stub the RCAs up through this existing hole. Now be aware, on this harness, the receptacle goes up to the center dash location. The other end has 2 plugs toward the 2 amplifiers, so keep that in mind. Feed them through this hole. Take out a little bit of the slack there, just so it's easy hookup. This excess will have to be coiled. We're gonna zip tie it, clean it up, and keep it nice and tight to the existing wire loom. So we're getting ready to hook up the head unit. Everything will be pre-terminated, so again, it's gonna be plug and play. I'll go over these connections here in a second. On the RCA inputs, you can see that there are multiple zone inputs on this head unit, and they're gonna correspond with the zone labels on the RCA. We're gonna do zone 1 as dash speakers, zone 2 as cage speakers, and then there's a dedicated sub output for the subwoofer. This head unit is actually 4-zone capable, but we're just gonna use the 3 on this setup. So we're gonna prepare for the install of the head unit. We're gonna locate this bracket. Now there are existing factory dimples in these locations. We had already pre-drilled it just for a test fit. So we're gonna lay this guy down and then send these number 8s in. So we're gonna use this factory plug, which is not being used for anything else, as our power hookup. It has a keyed sense ignition, so it's gonna turn on our head unit when the start button is pushed. And then it does time out with the factory smart lock. It's gonna push this plug behind the panel and then feed it up through our drilled hole. Now we're ready for head unit hookups. Power, 6-pin plug being connected to that one. Remote output of the head unit to remote to the amps. Zone 1 is going to be L1 and R1, sending signal for our dash speakers. Zone 2 and L3 and R3 for the sub. Now these zone controls just give us independent volume control for each area of the vehicle. So again, our dash will be zone 1, cage speaker zone 2, and subwoofer as a dedicated sub-zone on this unit. There is a USB input, which can also act as a charger. It does come with an extension, so that can be routed elsewhere. I would recommend near the glove box here, just for easy access, where you can actually still charge with the unit in the glove box. So be sure you're not pinching any wires around the perimeter. And then we're gonna attach the mounting bracket in the back here using the number 8 Phillips. And then we're gonna move forward and attach the faceplate to the bracket that we already installed. So we're getting ready to install the RGB controller. This guy's gonna be mounted up in the tunnel here, as you can see, with plugs ready for that plug and play action. Now in this tunnel, there is a ground distribution block from the factory. with an accessory turn on and then factory ground. So we're going to just hook up to that existing terminal block. So because this RGB controller uses an RF remote control, it can be tucked away, hidden, and you don't need line of sight to adjust the colors or patterns. So using a 10mm socket, you can remove the accessory power here. Using this accessory power, the RGB controller will only receive power when the start button is pushed. If you want constant power, you can connect it to this terminal. Just be aware that your remote control will be the only thing that turns it on or off. Now we're going to prepare for the sub box install. And before we start to get this guy in place, we're going to actually get a few other pieces out of the way. So the brake line here is attached to this seat bracket. So we're going to remove the nut and bolt on both the passenger side here and the driver's side. And then there's a Y block underneath the center tunnel that we're going to use a T15 to remove that bolt. That's going to provide us just a little bit more slack to get the box in place, and then we can retighten up the Y block. So remove the 10mm holding the brake line to the seat anchor. Removed the T15 bolt with the Y block, and we just lifted that Y block out of its location, provide that extra slack. Now we can take the sub box here. So once that box is slid into location, you're able to actually move the Y block back in its factory location and reinstall the T15 bolt. So making sure the box is nice and flat on the floor, we're going to drill out the floor panel locations using the pre-drilled holes in the box. This is going to allow us to through bolt the box to the floor, make sure it doesn't move anywhere. With the holes drilled, we can insert the through bolts using washers. We've got our box bolted down. Now we're ready to install the sub. Now on the sub wire, there is a positive indicated wire. It is also square in shape, and it is the only one with the wiring. That will go to your positive terminal on the sub. You can start by hand tightening these, and then take a Phillips drive and snug them up. Drop it in location, and then attach the mounting screws. So we're going to prepare for the amplifier install. The distribution blocks fit really well in the battery compartment area. Short, easy leads to get to hook up to the battery itself. And once we get the amplifiers mounted up, we'll do a quick test fit with the dash speakers, quick test listen to make sure all the speakers function, and then we'll rebutton everything back up. So my personal recommendation is to put the corresponding distribution block underneath the matching battery terminal. Just keeps everything simple in your mind. Negative to the negative terminal, positive to the positive terminal on the battery. So I'm going to install the distribution blocks inside the battery compartment area. I just use the edge as a guide and inset it in a little bit. I also kept the feed on the outside of the compartment just to give you a little bit more wiggle room as you're connecting up the amplifier leads. So we're getting ready to install the cage and dash speaker amplifier, the 600.4. As you can see again, it's pre-terminated with power ground run to the correct length, and then your remote turn on lead. So we're gonna throw this guy up top. Again, using that battery compartment edge as a guide. And then I just insetted a little bit to avoid bolt interference. .1 amp is going to power the sub. I can tuck right in this outside corner. We're only covering up some of the French on that label, so still within all compliances to show VIN numbers. sure you're not pinching any wires underneath. Since the battery is still disconnected, we're going to terminate the amplifier leads to the distribution blocks. So there's enough length to feed everything around where it needs to go. And using a 3mm Allen key, you can tighten these screw terminals down. Make sure they're nice, snug, and tight so they don't come out. As a personal rule of thumb, I always keep the same amplifier hooked up to the same side of the distribution block. So if this guy is hooked up for this ground, it's going to be on the same side for the power for the same amplifier. With all the wires connected, snap on the covers to protect from any accidental shorts. We still won't connect the power and ground to the battery quite yet until everything else is ready and final connected. So on the 600.4, we're going to connect the same zones as described earlier, L1 and R1, to the front to control the dash. It's labeled front. R1 and L1. And rear, control the cage speakers as L2 and R2. And finally, the last pair to the sub input as that dedicated sub zone. We'll tidy up these wires, tuck them down nice and tight, and clean up that once we do our system test. These wires are the amp turn-ons, controlled by the head unit, so the amps only turn on when the head unit is. Each has their own respective plug. Doesn't matter which one goes to what, they're butt spliced together. It's the same signal to turn the amplifiers on. With all the other amp terminals connected, we're finally connecting the speaker outputs. So subwoofer can be connected to the sub box. Now we do have this harness which splits the speaker outputs from the lighting outputs, and everything can be connected here in the center tunnel. That can then be tucked up and cleaned up for wiring. On the output side, we can now connect the dash speakers and the cage speakers. Again, everything is labeled as your left and right, driver and passenger. The driver side cage uses the same signal between the two, so they are the split green. The passenger cage is running on the split purple. Again, same signal between those two speakers on this side. And then our dash speakers, driver side here, will be white, and passenger side is going to be gray. So we're going to temporarily reinstall the dash speakers now that everything else is hooked up and connected. We're going to do a quick listening demo just to make sure all the speakers are functioning as intended, make sure all the lights work as intended. Then we'll be able to tie up all the wires before we re-button up the entire vehicle. On these dash speakers, because of this tight clearance with the fuel tank, make sure you use these spacer rings and feed the wire through the ring first. Then you can connect the speaker. As the final step before testing the system, you're now able to connect the power and ground to the battery. Always do power first. All right, now we're ready for our test. All right, so now everything is hooked up. We're gonna do a quick listening demo, make sure everything is functioning as it should. If we go into the head unit here and push this main button, it brings up with your total volume and zone volume levels. So zone 1 is the dash. Zone 2 being your cage speakers. Zone 3 is not hooked up, and then zone 4 is your subwoofer. Now there's also a quick shortcut to adjust your sub output right from the home screen here. So if you actually just push up or down, it automatically adjusts that sub output rather than cycling through each zone. Again, from this home screen, if you just adjust from the wheel, it's adjusting your master volume. So once you have your zone, independent zone volumes set, then you can just quick, easy access to your main master zone and control everything with the same ratio. All right, so not only does this look great, it sounds awesome. We're gonna get this buttoned up, clean all the wiring, give it one final run through, and get this back to Central Florida Power Sports. Thanks so much, guys.